I'm sure that anyone reading this knows what Netflix is, just like knowing what McDonald's is. But I'm also sure that you probably don't know what the Netflix game is. Regardless of how you use it, you would have seen the adverts for films and series that Netflix has to offer and stay on the screen for about 15 seconds or so and moves on to the next one until the loop restarts again. It sounds boring, but basically, the Netflix game is where you try to guess the title of the film or series before the title comes onto the screen. I can't remember when I started it, but like second nature, whenever I'm on Netflix and the adverts start, I sit there and play from start to finish, like I'm drawn to it. I continue until I've correctly guessed every title in the loop. I don't gain anything from it. I don't need to play it. It's just a fun little thing to do if I'm bored after watching Netflix, and it gives me personal satisfaction to know that my memory is good enough to remember multiple films and series. Of all my regrets in life, introducing my friends to this game is my biggest. 2 years ago, I hosted a house party with some friends, and due to some people being lightweights and others knowing their limits, it ended up being only 5 of us left. Me, Johnny, Steve, Jennifer, and Lauren. We had drinks and snacks, so Steve suggested watching a horror film. We all knew why, but the girls didn't protest, and after scrolling through, Steve settled upon a possession film. The film was good, but during it, I felt a noticeable chill in the air. It wasn't there before the film had started, but the rest of the audience didn't notice because they were snuggling up under the covers, whispering and giggling. When it finished, the atmosphere was so weird. Something was in the air, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Instead of watching another film, we sat there talking, and in the background, Netflix went idle mode, and the advert started. I'd only played the Netflix game by myself, as I felt too awkward to start saying the names of the titles in front of people. But after drinking, awkwardness went out of the window. I introduced the game to my friends, but I changed the rules slightly. If no one got it right or didn't say the right title in time, we moved on to the next title. But if someone got it right and in time, everyone else had a drink, 4 fingers, and the winner was the one who had the most correct titles. To the people who don't drink socially, a finger is the amount of drink that your fingers cover if you're holding a bottle. So 4 fingers would be drinking from the top of your index finger down to the bottom of your pinky finger. Steve shot me a side-eyed glance that said, "Don't cock-block me, bro." And to voice his disapproval justifiably, he said, "Ugh, don't you think it's a bit late now? We're tired, and we should get to bed." Teasing him, Jennifer nudged Lauren and said, "That's okay, Steve. Me and Lauren will stay and play. You and Johnny can go to bed by yourselves if you want to be babies." Taking the hint, Lauren laughed and said, "Yeah, guys. If you can't handle your drinks, then there's no point in playing. Are you scared of losing?" Jennifer and Lauren flashed devilish smiles at the guys, and it was almost as if their masculinity was being questioned. Steve pushed his shoulders back, making his broad chest more prominent, slightly flexed his biceps, and agreed to play. Before we started, I brought over enough drinks for us all. Everything was in place, the rules were reiterated, and then the game started. It turned out much better than I expected. We had a riotous time, with titles being on the tip of our tongues, groans when someone got to it before we did, drunken slurring when we were trying to answer, and a laughter when someone got it hopelessly wrong. We had so much fun that we didn't notice that our goose pimples were raised. Subconsciously, under the drunkenness, my body somehow knew that something was wrong. At the end of it, I was the winner, and with the amount of alcohol in our systems, all we could do was sleep to the chagrin of Steve and Johnny. The next day, we woke up at different times and went about our days. With the weekend and with our jobs, we quickly forgot about the Netflix game. A few days later, I had finished watching a series, and when I came back into the front room after making something to eat, the adverts were on, so I started to play. A chill that I felt during the possession film had inexplicably found its way into my front room and took shelter on my body. Not thinking anything of it, I continued playing, but there were some things that were wrong. For example, in the advert for Friends, Rachel has always been in the middle, but now she was on the right-hand side at the end. Or in the advert for Stranger Things, the kids were shown from behind, but now they were shown from the front. There were so many other adverts where it had changed from what I remembered, but my brain rationalized it by telling me that the adverts couldn't stay the same, so someone in the back office of Netflix had to have made the changes. But my eyes told me something different. It didn't seem like a creative decision, and the reason why was because in all the changes, whether it was Seinfeld standing by the door instead of by the fridge, or the man in Bridgerton standing by himself without the lady next to him, the characters were staring at me, grinning. After noticing this, I let the adverts run and let them repeat just to check that what I was seeing wasn't my eyes playing tricks on me. After 2 rounds of seeing the adverts change and the characters in various films and series grinning at me, I chalked it up to a long day at work and turned Netflix off. I shivered, even though I turned the heating up before I'd settled down. And as much as I tried, I couldn't shake this cold feeling off. It had nestled under my skin. Netflix weirded me out after that experience, so after I finished what I was watching, it was turned off, like a toy I used and discarded when I was done with it. I did it every time, but it was a struggle, because in the back of my mind, I always wanted to check if the adverts were still being strange. After a few weeks of this battle of wills, I crumbled and let the adverts play. The first time I noticed the changes, it was subtle, but now it was obvious. They were waiting for me. Previously, the only change to the Friends advert was that Rachel had moved to the right whilst grinning, but now all the friends were staring at me with their wide smiles. The Stranger Things kids were staring and smiling at me. Seinfeld and his friends were staring and smiling at me, and the Bridgerton advert brought the lady back onto the screen, but she was also staring and smiling at me. The grins had evolved into chilling smiles, like they were happy I'd came back to the adverts. I was just about to turn it off when the next advert surprised me. It was a woman, cowering against the bed in fear, with a masked man standing over her with a knife. And another man was standing next to the cowering woman with a massive smile on his face. The woman was Jennifer. I was rooted to the spot, and if it wasn't because I was so used to checking the bottom left-hand corner of the screen to see the title, I would have missed it completely. It said, "A Knife Edge." I felt like I was frozen, and I completely zoned out. What the hell had I just seen? Jennifer was not an actress, nor had she done any recent photo shoots. So why had she just been on my screen moments ago? My whole body went tingly, and I sat there, waiting for the advert to roll around again. After what seemed like an eternity, the advert rolled around again, and it had changed significantly. Now, instead of the man standing over her, he was now kneeling over her, with his knife raised above her head like she was a sacrificial lamb. And the smiling man had his fingers over her eyelids, pulling them up, forcing her to see the end coming. I felt like I was welded to the sofa. This was utterly crazy. This couldn't be real. A rational thought crossed my mind, which was that my friends had gone behind my back to Netflix to prank me. They must have done. Even though I repeated it silently, I doubted myself. Why would they do that? Instead of overthinking the situation, I decided that calling Jennifer was the best thing to do. With shaky fingers, I called her and prayed that she would answer. She picked up after a few rings, and my fear slipped out. "Jennifer? Thank God! Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm doing okay. Why do you ask?" In my haste to get through to her, I hadn't thought about my answer if she responded. The longer I didn't answer, the more awkward it would get. Well, basically, I cut myself off, because as I was speaking, I realized how stupid the whole thing was. I didn't know what was going on, but it wasn't real. Jennifer was okay. Actually, don't worry. Where are you? I'm out at a pub. You should come down. I haven't seen you in a while. Thanks for the invite, but I'm feeling a bit ill actually. Sorry for the call. Okay. Well, get better soon, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye. I felt at ease after talking with her, but like an aftertaste, I still felt a twinge of fear, as if there was something lurking around the corner. I put that feeling behind me and went to bed. I had a disjointed sleep, filled with horrible dreams and sweat, and I woke up to a call from Steve. "Hey," was all I could say before he cut me off. They killed Jennifer! They killed her! He screamed, the words feeling like lava flowing through my ears. What? What? Through tears and snot, Steve recounted how he had gotten a call from Jennifer last night, inviting him to join her at the pub. But he was at another pub with friends, so he suggested meeting her later that night instead. She agreed to that, and told him she would let him know when she left the pub. Around 1:30 a.m., albeit hazy from the beer in his system, he remembered that Jennifer hadn't called him, and she wasn't one to stay out late. Stepping outside, he called Jennifer, and when she didn't answer, he felt a twinge of panic. Even if she was home and safe, she wasn't one to say that she'd do something and then not do it. Alcohol or no alcohol, something was wrong. He raced down to her house as quickly as possible and saw that the door was slightly ajar. With liquid courage, he burst through the door and called out to her, hearing silence in response. Light was coming out of the front room, and when he went in, he saw the Netflix adverts rolling through. When Steve mentioned the adverts, my whole body stiffened up. Not wanting to interrupt him, I let him talk. Verging on hyperventilating, he explained that he walked into her bedroom and saw the gruesome scene. Through dry retching, he told me that he found her on the floor by her bed, with a knife sticking out of her head. Those words hit me like a truck, and my phone fell through my fingers. I felt like I had been stabbed and shot at the same time. Asking him to clarify what he said was futile, because I heard him clearly. I knew I would faint with the exertion of trying to speak through my shock, so I kept quiet and allowed him to continue. Steve carried on, telling me how he threw up in her bedroom from the side of it and called the police immediately. Words became pointless, so after plans to meet up soon and a sniffled goodbye, we parted ways. My life became a blur after that, and I robotically carried on living. I continued working and went to the funeral a month later and saw that Johnny, Steve, and Lauren all looked as rough as I did. We got through the day, and we slowly but surely drifted further apart to the point where I didn't know anything about them. I slowly began to rebuild myself and began a relationship with one of my colleagues. I didn't forget about Jennifer, my friends on Netflix, but I chose not to think about them, and that went well for about 6 months. With my new girlfriend Sarah, I had lied to her and told her that I didn't have a Netflix account and that I'd rather watch TV, and to her credit, there was no argument from her. That collapsed when she invited her sister and her husband over for dinner one night. When it was just me and Sarah, I can control my environment, but with outsiders, it was impossible, especially with her sister Sophie, who seemed like the kind of person who got what she wanted. As much as I wanted them to eat, drink, and then leave, I knew that it wouldn't happen, and the closer we got to finishing our meal, the more apprehensive I got about it. What are we gonna watch then? Went through me like acid when Sophie put the question out to us after we'd finished the meal and ran out of things to talk about. Thinking on my feet, I turned the TV on and scrolled through the available genres and channels, hoping that she would pick one. My hopes were dashed when she took the control from me and scrolled through the additional services like YouTube and BBC iPlayer. The more she scrolled, the harder my heart thumped against my chest, and I felt like Edgar Allan Poe and wondered if they could hear it. My heart sunk when she clicked on Netflix. I threw a Hail Mary, saying that I didn't have an account, and my teeth clenched in anger when she logged in with her details instead. I couldn't win, because I either had to accept it and watch it, or cause an argument when I told him to get out and then have to explain to Sarah why I did that. Even after 6 months of healing, I wasn't ready to reopen that page. I sighed deeply and waited for Sophie to pick something. I don't even know what she picked. I zoned out and zoned back in again when it finished. And instead of coming out of it and saying their goodbyes, Sophie left Netflix on. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my body, and it took all I had to not rip the control out of her hands to turn it off. I yawned and shot Sarah a side-eyed glance that said, "It's late. They should go." Sarah took the hint and said that we had to get up early in the morning, but Sophie brushed it off. "We're not boring like you two," she laughed. "I just want to see what's new." I closed my eyes to mentally recalibrate myself and open them, waiting. The adverts rolled around again, and it was like an alcoholic taking a sip of alcohol after a long period of sobriety. I was intoxicated by their allure, but I was also terrified of what I would see. Sophie was watching the adverts to see what was new, but I was playing spot the difference and watching the adverts like a hawk. It was strange, but nothing changed at all. It was just how I remembered it before the strangeness. Feeling better and more at ease, I relaxed and let the adverts play in front of me. Luckily for Sarah and I, Sophie found a film that she found interesting, which meant that she didn't have to stay for much longer. We said our goodbyes, and whilst hugging Sophie, I looked at the TV screen and all the color drained from my face. Walter White from Breaking Bad was staring at me with a massive smile on his face. I visibly shook and bit my tongue so hard I drew blood to stop myself from screaming. I turned the TV off and excused myself to the bedroom, telling Sarah and our guest that I had a headache. Sarah came to bed shortly afterwards, and in my fear and bewilderment, I fell into a weird sleep. I woke up to a pounding inside my head that sounded like a pattern, so I gritted my teeth and started to tune in. It sounded like a Netflix tune. The dum we've all come to know. Like the feeling of hunger that forces a lion to go out and hunt, I felt physically drawn to the front room. I got out of bed and looked over at Sarah, wishing that she'd wake up and tell me to come back to bed, but she was fast asleep. I hung my head and left the bedroom, feeling a sense of dread, just like Steve described when he went to Jennifer's house. There was light emanating from the front room, and I knew I had to go in. I sat down on the couch, and to my utter horror, Netflix was on. My brain tried to rationalize it by saying that Sarah may have turned it back on, but I knew that wasn't the case, because she always turned it off before bed. The adverts went across the screen as normal, and sensing me, the adverts warped again. The dragon from How to Train Your Dragon and its writer both looked at me with a massive smile, seemingly happy to see me. I was fixated on the screen. I couldn't look away. The smiles that I saw were taunting smiles. I watched with bated breath, hoping that all I saw were creepy smiles, and then I saw more. In the next advert I saw, Johnny was stood on a chair, beaten up, with a noose around his neck, and the smiling man was standing in front of him with a smile that made my skin crawl. The masked man was standing at the side with his foot on the chair, and Hangman flashed up on the bottom corner of the screen. I ran into the bedroom and picked up my phone to call Johnny. I messed up with Jennifer, and I wasn't going to mess up again. "Hello?" came a rough voice from my phone. "Johnny, how are you?" I asked, masking the terror in my voice. "I'm doing good, thanks. What's up?" he slurred. "After Jennifer, I feel like we've drifted apart, and I just wanted to see my buddy. You're free tonight, right?" Johnny faltered, but I cut him off. "Sorted then. I'll see you soon," I said, weirdly proud of myself for keeping up such a chipper composure under such circumstances. I quickly got dressed, jumped into my car, and drove as fast as I could. I blew about 6 red lights and got flashed twice, but I didn't care about any of that, because the priority was saving Johnny's life. I did an hour's drive in 30 minutes, and when I got there, the lights were off. I banged on the door repeatedly, and after a few minutes, Johnny opened the door, and it was instantly clear to me that his better days were behind him. He looked ragged. From the bottle in his hand, the way that he leant against the doorframe, and the smell that radiated from him, I could tell that he was drunk. He hugged me drunkenly, and I politely accepted the hug, walking past him to go to his front room. He came in shortly afterwards and dropped onto the sofa and poured himself a large glass of vodka. He was so drunk that listening to him was pointless, because he slurred his words so much. So I ummed and ahed and nodded until he talked himself into a drunken stupor. The night turned to day, and luckily it was Saturday, which meant that I didn't have to rush off to work, so I stayed until the afternoon to make sure that he was okay. When I felt that he was safe to leave, I left. I called Sarah and explained that I took a frantic call from a drunk friend, so I went to check on him. And after an ear bashing from her, she accepted that my friends were important to me and that I needed to go to them if need be. I didn't think I'd be seeing them again so soon though. I called Johnny every evening and even went down to spend the night with him a few times, across a span of 2 weeks, just to make sure that he was okay. But my efforts were in vain, because I took a call from Steve around 1 a.m. one morning. He wasn't wailing like he did when he called about Jennifer, but I could tell that he was more broken than he was since the last time we spoke. I didn't need him to tell me what happened, because I already knew. "He hung himself, right?" I asked, dejectedly. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. He didn't even bother asking me how I knew. Time went by in a blur again, and after the funeral, I vowed that I wouldn't lose another friend in that way again. Before I could make that a reality, I needed to know why it was happening. I racked my brain for ages, and even though I disputed it every single time, the only answer that I could rationalize was that we brought something into our world from the horror film we watched, and it infected the Netflix adverts. As crazy as it sounded, I knew that was the reason why I'd lost Jennifer and Johnny, and I needed to let my remaining friends know as soon as possible. I took a deep breath, then I called Steve and told him to meet me at our familiar bar, and I didn't take no for an answer. And then I did the same with Lauren. When we met up, they didn't look right. They'd become shadows of their former selves. What I needed to say to them couldn't have been said or understood sober, so after I got us some drinks, I took some big gulps and braced myself for what I had to say to them. I told them everything from start to finish, and when I finished, there was silence that greeted me. Steve and Lauren looked at each other, and then looked at me, and with a quivering voice, Lauren asked, "What do we do?" Steve didn't shoot her a side-eyed glance or look at me differently, so I knew that he believed me on some level. Lauren threw me a curveball, because as stupid as it sounds, I hadn't actually thought about that yet. Thinking about it briefly, I decided that we had to delete Netflix from our lives, as in, delete it from our TVs and our phones, and make excuses to leave whenever someone wanted to watch Netflix in their presence, so that they didn't get caught out like I did with Sophie. My logic was that if we didn't feed Netflix, whatever was in the adverts would starve. That logic was flawed though, and we found out the hard way. We were good for a while, and then I got a call from Lauren after 2 in the morning, and my heart lurched because I knew what it was for, but I didn't know who it was for. When she told me it was about Steve, the fear for my life turned into a fear for someone else's. Through tears, she told me that she had followed my instructions to a T, but she was awoken to thumping in her ears and focusing in on it. She realized that it was the Netflix theme. Knowing that she held one of our lives in her hands, she begrudgingly went to the front room where she saw adverts playing out on her TV screen. She explained that the adverts noticed her. The adverts warped, and the characters gave her an eerie smile, as if they were happy to see someone new. Remembering what I told her and Steve in the bar, she sat there and watched the adverts from start to finish, then watched them again just to make sure that nothing came up about us. And then she saw it. An advert of Steve burning. I could tell that she was trying so hard to keep it all together, and it was a struggle for her to say it all, but after a while, she was able to explain to me that Steve was on the floor in a burning house. The smiling man had his foot on his ankle, and the masked man had a flamethrower that was like a dragon, breathing fire onto Steve's charred back. She said that the image would forever be etched onto her brain, and the title of this terrible picture was Sahara. In the midst of this, the only question on my lips was, "Why have you called me and not Steve?" And as if she read my mind, she told me that she had tried to get through to Steve first, but when she couldn't get through to him, she called me instead. I quickly got dressed and gunned into Steve's after picking up Lauren, and when we got there, we banged on the door until he answered. As soon as he saw us, his head dropped, as if he had resigned himself to his fate. All he could do was ask how, and Lauren tearfully answered, telling him that he burned in a fire. I looked at Lauren, and then looked at Steve, and in that moment, I knew what we would do. We would keep Steve with us, because whilst whatever was causing this cheated a bit, for the most part, it played fair, and I knew that Steve couldn't get caught in a house fire if we were with him. I took him into our house, albeit after a massive argument with Sarah about putting my friends before her, and Lauren got him a job at her job, and all was good for a while. But there was something unsaid between the three of us. If it went wrong, and we lost Steve to the adverts, we all knew that we'd done our best. 3 months later, we found out that our best wasn't enough. Because like Mike Tyson famously said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Due to a mix-up, miscommunication, and a catalog of unforgivable errors on our part, Steve ended up being home alone because Sarah had left as she wasn't expecting him to come back that early. As much as it pains me to admit, I forgot about Steve in the hustle and bustle of the day, and so did Lauren. And I only remembered him when I got the call from a neighbor about my house engulfed in flames. My body locked up, and I felt tight, as if a snake had coiled itself around me. As I called Lauren, all I could think about was how much I blamed myself for allowing these things to happen, or at the very least, opening the door to something to come through to our world. All I needed to tell Lauren for her to break down on the phone was, it happened again. We went from 5 to 2, and now, even though we didn't say it, we knew our days were numbered. We had the funeral for Steve, and when I caught eyes with Lauren across the room, we wordlessly told each other that it was pointless trying to avoid it. Just in case there were any misunderstandings, I called her a few days later, and we created a pact. We would forget that the other existed and would only call each other when Netflix cheated and forced us to watch the adverts and showed us the fate of the other. No phone call? No problem. I knew that there was something targeting us, but life wasn't making it any easier for me because Sarah left me and I had to find a new place to live. I found a cheap place and settled in quickly. The first few months were hard, but it got easier when I stopped thinking about Netflix and Lauren. A year after we lost Steve, I'd done well for myself. I'd gotten a better job. I'd found a new place to live, and even though I hadn't spoke to Lauren since our phone call a year ago, I hoped she was doing well. My hopes for Lauren and I to continue with our lives as we'd been doing was extinguished when I awoke one night by the dum that exploded inside of my brain. I jolted awake, suddenly more awake than I had ever been in my life, and I snapped my head to my side cabinet to look at my phone. Netflix had re-downloaded itself on my phone, but instead of the adverts starting after idleness, they bypassed that stage and started as soon as the Netflix logo faded away. The characters in the adverts were staring at me with horrible smiles, with their smiles unnaturally reaching the middle of their faces. Each advert that I saw had the same meaning behind the smiles, and the meaning was, "We have utterly broken you. You are going to be alone, and it's all your fault." I sat there, knowing that Lauren was going to get killed, but I didn't know how. It took everything in my power to not throw up, because I knew that I would see how my friend was going to get murdered, and there was nothing that I could do. I felt like I was watching a snuff film. I watched the adverts once, twice, thrice, and Lauren didn't appear in any of them. Just as I was about to give up with it, as the fourth roll of adverts were coming to an end, Lauren appeared on my phone screen, being held underwater in a bathtub by a masked man with her face locked into a watery scream. Like all the other times I'd seen this masked man with one of my friends, the smiling man stood next to him, mocking my helplessness, just as much as the swimming with the fishes that came up on the bottom corner of the screen did. My hands were shaking as I called Lauren, and when she answered, she didn't say anything other than how. My mouth suddenly became extremely dry when I had to tell her that she was going to get drowned, but I couldn't tell her when or why. I just knew it was going to happen, just like in Final Destination. Once you saw the advert, you couldn't stop it from happening, but unlike Final Destination, I couldn't save anyone. What happened next will never leave me. Maybe the gravity of the situation finally hit her, or maybe whatever was bubbling inside her spilled over. But she launched into a nasty and disgusting tirade at me, screaming and swearing at me. She sounded like a banshee, blaming me for Jennifer, Johnny, Steve, and her, and I couldn't answer because she was correct. I could hear the pain and the anguish in her voice, and it tore through me, searing my heart. There was someone who was absolutely broken on the phone to me, and I couldn't do anything about it. She hung up, and I feel ashamed to admit that I didn't call her back, nor go to her house to be with her, because it was futile. She was going to get drowned, and we had both accepted that. Lauren was very professional, so when a couple of weeks later, she didn't turn up for a week without saying anything to her boss, nor answering her phone, he sent the police out to do a welfare check on her, and they found her in her bathtub. I only found out about the funeral on Facebook, because since I'd lost my 3 other friends before Lauren, there was no one around to tell me about it. In hindsight though, it was best that I didn't go, because if 4 people in a 5-person friendship group get murdered, it wouldn't have been too far-fetched to start pointing fingers at the remaining friend. Now that my friends had been killed, I was stuck in limbo, because on one hand, it may have been over, but on the other hand, I could still be next. Based on that logic, I decided to live my life to the fullest. I created a bucket list. I've been traveling, and I've just been enjoying myself, because the adverts could get me at any time. This all happened 2 years ago, and on the 2nd anniversary of the day that we played the game at the party, I felt that chill that I felt, but instead of it being a fleeting feeling, it was constant. It was like there was a large restaurant fridge that was open in the kitchen, and the cold air was wafting through to me, licking my skin with a barbed tongue. All this time, I kept on saying that I would accept it when the adverts came for me, but when it came down to it, I got frightened and tried to turn my phone off so that Netflix couldn't re-download itself. But it wouldn't turn off. Without warning, the da-dum reverberated around my house as Netflix re-downloaded itself as quickly as the light would turn on when I flicked the light switch on. There I was, on my sofa, phone in hand, waiting to see my fate. In the midst of the fear I felt, I also felt a morbid sense of privilege, because unless you're terminally ill, how many people know when the end is, or how it comes about? It was almost anticlimactic, this gigantic part of my life being discovered by huddling over a screen. The advert started, and this time, it was very different. There were no identifying features on any of the characters. All I saw were eyeless, noseless, and earless faces, with smiles that took up most of their faces, that masked murderous tendencies. It was like something you'd see in a horror movie, but it wasn't a movie. It was my life, and it was happening right now. It seemed to be genuine happiness on the part of the characters, because they'd caught me. It took 2 years and 4 lives, but they finally had me where they wanted me, and they were going to take their opportunity. If it wasn't for the titles in the bottom corner, I wouldn't have known what the adverts were for because of how warped they'd become with the smiling faces. Just like Lauren, I didn't see the advert I needed to see and didn't see it on the 3rd roll, nor the 4th, nor the 9th. Whatever it was teasing me at the lowest point in my life. It was forcing me to rewatch these horrible adverts, adding to my despair like seasoning chicken. Then, it happened. Like a lightning strike to my nervous system, I saw myself. Since I was on my phone, I quickly took a screenshot of it. As much as I wanted to know, I also wanted to get into bed and cover myself and forget about all of this. But after losing my friends, I knew it was pointless to do that. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, and after psyching myself up, I got into bed and looked at the picture. What I saw finally broke me and completely severed the frayed links to normality I was fruitlessly clinging to. The title was Heads Will Roll, and I saw my head, with my body on the ground between my friends and the smiling man. Jennifer, with a knife sticking out of her head. Johnny, with a noose around his neck. Steve, with a charred body and clothes. And Lauren, wet from head to toe, with bruises around her neck, were standing there, smiling at me. These weren't gotcha smiles, though. They were more loving, in a welcoming kind of way, like they were waiting for me to join them. The smiling man's smile was a gotcha smile, though, as if he'd been biding his time until he found me. But the most frightening and shocking thing about it all was the other person. Instead of the masked man, it was me, holding a cleaver in one hand and my decapitated head in the other. with a massive smile on my face. All the wind was knocked out of me, like the Hulk had given me a gut punch. All this time, I thought the masked man would show his face, but at the end, whatever it was, couldn't even grant me that, and instead, decided to be ungracious in victory and show my face instead of its own. And it went deeper than that though. Even though I didn't directly murder them, I had killed them because ultimately, I was the one who introduced the game to my friends. It was like that mirror in a zoo in Chicago that basically said, "You're looking at the most dangerous animal in the world, which is man." As much as I wanted to blame Steve for picking the possession film, it wouldn't have been right or fair, nor would it have even mattered. I was going to get decapitated by the cleaver in my kitchen, and it was impossible to stop. I had indirectly been the killer the whole time, and the advert took glee in making that clear to me. I couldn't run, I couldn't hide, and in that moment, I decided to accept my fate. Someone was going to find me, beheaded. At the end of a long story, I just wanted to reiterate the message in the title. Do not, under any circumstances, let the adverts play after you finish watching Netflix. Turn it off immediately, or watch something else. Regardless of how you use Netflix, do not let it be idle. I don't know if this was isolated to my friends and I, or if it spread through the servers around the world, but you need to be on the safe side. This is not a YMMV kind of situation, so I don't want anyone else's life on my conscience, because I kept this to myself. If you've read this story and thought it's not true, it's just a story, and I can't help you, but I can pray for you. My friends and I are proof that this isn't a game. You have been warned. Please, if you value your life and the lives of your friends and family, if you've played the Netflix game, don't play it again. And if you haven't, don't.